14 minutes. That is exactly how much time is left on this countdown timer before my entire life officially goes up in flames. My hands are shaking so violently I can barely hit the keys on my laptop. Every single pore on my skin is leaking cold sweat, and the ticking of that digital clock is bouncing inside my skull like a sledgehammer. Look at me. Just look at this pathetic stickman. I am locked inside my own room, a literal prisoner of a psychological trap I constructed with my own hands. My phone is sitting on my desk, laughing at me with a blinking red battery icon that reads 3%. The key to the lockbox holding my charging cable? I threw it out the window 20 minutes ago. It is currently sitting somewhere out there in the dark, buried under 3 inches of overgrown grass. If I do not finish this freelance project and hit the send button before that timer hits 0, a $500 contract vanishes into thin air. And if that money vanishes, my rent check bounces tomorrow morning. But wait, it gets better. If I fail, my bank account, which currently holds a grand total of $54, will be completely wiped out because I gave my banking password to the one person in this world I absolutely despise, with a strict legal contract stating they can spend every last cent on premium dog food if I miss this deadline. You're probably wondering how a 23-year-old guy ended up in a high-stakes psychological thriller inside his own suburban bedroom. You are probably thinking this is insane, and you are completely right. It is insane. But this insanity is the only reason I am still breathing. This is what happens when you realize that everything the internet taught you about productivity is an absolute lie, and you are forced to turn boring self-help theories into brutal weapons of financial survival. Let us take a step back, because 7 years ago, I was not this crazy. 7 years ago, I was just an 18-year-old kid entering college in America, wide-eyed, full of hope, and completely terrified of failing in the real world. I remember looking at the staggering cost of tuition, the skyrocketing prices of rent, and the terrifying headlines about the economy, and I made a promise to myself. I promised I would outwork everyone. I promised I would become a human machine. So I did what every ambitious, naive teenager does. I turned to YouTube and I started buying books. Over the next 7 years, I read more than 50 productivity books. I'm talking about the holy grails of self-help: Atomic Habits, Deep Work, the 80-20 Principle, Getting Things Done, the 4-Hour Workweek. You name it, I bought it, highlighted it, and memorized it. I became a walking dictionary of self-improvement. And for a while, I genuinely believed I had unlocked the secret code to life. I felt like a productivity god. I designed the ultimate aesthetic routine that looked like a carbon copy of a Silicon Valley billionaire's morning. I woke up at exactly 5 in the morning, even when my eyes felt like they were filled with sand. I forced down green smoothies made of kale and chalky protein powder that tasted like liquid grass. I sat at my desk and meticulously filled out a gratitude journal, writing down 3 things I was thankful for while staring at a blank wall. I set up beautiful color-coded Pomodoro timers on my laptop, working for 25 minutes and resting for 5. I adopted the elite mindset of the world's top CEOs, nodding along to the famous advice that said, if a request is not a hell yes, then it must be a hell no. I felt so organized, so controlled, so superior to everyone else my age who was wasting their youth sleeping in and scrolling through social media. I had a system for my habits, a system for my tasks, and a system for my goals. I was convinced that because I knew the definitions of hyper-focus and biological prime time, the real world would just bend to my will. I thought that when I graduated, my productivity armor would protect me from the harsh financial realities of modern adulthood. Then, graduation day arrived, and the real world didn't just bend to my will, it hit me squarely in the jaw with a brass knuckle made of macroeconomic tragedy. Welcome to the 20s in modern America. Inflation didn't care about my 5 a.m. morning routine. The cost of living crisis didn't give a single crap about my color-coded Google Calendar. Suddenly, my student loan grace period ended, and a massive monthly bill landed on my desk like a live grenade. Rent for my tiny roach-infested apartment spiked by 20% in a single year. Grocery shopping became a psychological horror movie where 2 bags of basic necessities cost $100. To survive, I had to swallow my pride and dive headfirst into the brutal grinding gears of the gig economy. My beautifully planned days vanished. My 5 a.m. wake-up call was no longer for meditation and journaling. It was because I had to log in to DoorDash to deliver breakfast burritos to rich tech workers before rushing to my day job. And when my day job ended, I hopped straight into my beat-up car to drive Uber until 2 in the morning just to ensure I could afford to put gas in the tank the following day. This was the exact moment where the pristine, beautiful theories in my 50 productivity books started transforming into a cruel, toxic joke. I remember sitting in my car at a gas station at midnight, completely exhausted, staring at a notification on my phone for an Uber ride that paid a measly $4 for a 20-minute drive. I remembered the famous book advice, ask who, not how. Don't waste your valuable time doing low-level tasks, hire someone else to do them so you can focus on high-level strategy. I laughed out loud in my empty car, a sound that bordered on a psychological breakdown. Hire someone? With what money? I didn't have enough money to buy a decent meal, let alone hire a virtual assistant from the Philippines to optimize my life. The books were telling me to delegate, to automate, to elevate. The reality of my life was that I was an underpaid, sleep-deprived cog in an economic machine that was slowly crushing me to death. I tried to use my willpower to stay disciplined. I tried to force myself to study coding and build a Shopify store after working a 14-hour shift, but my brain was fried. My willpower was completely depleted. I would sit in front of my computer screen, staring at the flashing cursor, paralyzed by a wave of profound decision fatigue and anxiety. I had 20 different tasks to save my failing side business, but the sheer weight of them caused my brain to completely freeze. I would just stare at the screen for hours, unable to make a single choice, watching my life sink deeper into a black hole of debt until the day came when my credit card statement arrived and the total balance due read $10,000.
The silence in my apartment that night was absolutely deafening. I turned off all the lights because looking at the peeling wallpaper and the pile of unpaid bills was making my chest tighten to the point of physical pain. I lay flat on my back on the cold hardwood floor, staring up at the dark ceiling, paralyzed. My phone was vibrating on the floor next to me, a relentless, buzzing monster. Every few minutes, a new notification would light up the dark room, another automated text from the bank warning me about an overdue payment. Another email from my landlord with a subject line containing the words, "Immediate action required." Another alert from a collection agency. Each buzz felt like a physical blow to my ribs, but I could not move. I could not even reach out my hand to turn the phone off. This was the classic psychological freeze response. When the threat is too big, when the debt is too high, when the failure is too overwhelming, your brain stops trying to fight or run. It just shuts down. It pretends you do not exist so it can protect you from the horror of your reality. And as I lay there in that suffocating darkness, a strange, cold realization began to wash over me. The 50 productivity books collecting dust on my shelf were not wrong, but they were deeply, fundamentally flawed for someone like me. They were written by wealthy people who already had a massive financial safety net. They were written by professors with tenure, by executives with millions in venture capital, by gurus who had the privilege of sitting in air-conditioned offices with a staff of people taking care of their laundry, their meals, and their schedules. Those books treat time as the ultimate variable, assuming that everyone has the same 24 hours and the same mental energy to deploy. But when you were poor, when you were working 2 jobs just to stay alive, your time is not your own, and your mental energy is constantly being drained by the chronic stress of survival. The advice in those books was an accidental checklist of systemic privilege disguised as universal wisdom. The reason my retention rate for these habits was 0 was not because I lacked character or discipline. It was because you cannot build a beautiful house of habits on a foundation of economic quicksand. Willpower is a biological resource fueled by glucose and peace of mind. When you have neither, willpower is the very first thing to evaporate. I realized that if I kept trying to use standard, gentle self-help advice to pull myself out of this $10,000 hole, I was going to end up homeless. Gentle advice does not work when you are fighting for your life. I didn't need a habit tracker or a journal entry. I needed to take these polite academic concepts and weaponize them. I needed to turn them into brutal, non-negotiable psychological traps that gave my brain absolutely no choice but to fight its way out. I stood up from that floor, turned on the lights, and decided to execute a total pivot. No more Mr. Nice Stickman. If my brain wanted to play games of procrastination and fear, I was going to rig the game so that losing was too painful to contemplate. I looked at the first major bottleneck in my life, my phone. I was addicted to scrolling through social media for 6 hours a day because it was the only escape my brain had from the stress of my debt. But that addiction was actively preventing me from finishing the freelance projects that could actually pay off that debt. Traditional advice says to use an app blocker or put your phone in another room. That's a joke. Your brain just bypasses the blocker or walks into the other room because your willpower is weak. So I took the academic concept of the Ulysses Pact, the idea of locking your future self into a course of action from which you cannot escape, and I made it terrifying. I downloaded an app that generates a completely random 20-character password for my banking app, a password I could possibly not memorize. I changed my password to that random string of text. Then I copied that text and pasted it into a scheduled email addressed to the one person in my life I absolutely loathe, an arrogant, toxic former coworker who would love nothing more than to see me fail. I set the email to send automatically at exactly 8 a.m. the next morning. The only way to stop that email from sending was for me to manually log in and cancel it after uploading my completed freelance file to my client. If I procrastinated, if I fell asleep, if I spent even 30 minutes scrolling through TikTok, the timer would run out, the email would send, and that toxic jerk would receive my banking password with full authorization to drain my last $50. To add an extra layer of absolute security, I took my phone, placed it inside a timed lockbox, set the timer for 8 hours, and threw the physical key out my bedroom window into the dark courtyard below. My bridge was burned, my boats were destroyed. There was no room left for motivation, no room for inspiration, no room for waiting until I felt good. My brain was thrown into an immediate state of primal survival. It didn't matter that I was exhausted from driving Uber. It didn't matter that I felt burnt out. The pain of losing my last $50 and being humiliated by my worst enemy was infinitely greater than the friction of doing the work. I sat down at my desk, and for the first time in 7 months, my mind was perfectly clear. I didn't check my notifications because I physically couldn't. I didn't wander off to get a snack because my brain was hyper-focused on preventing a financial catastrophe. I wrote code like a man possessed. Every line of text was a strike against the invisible walls closing in on me. By 7:30 in the morning, the project was finished, the file was uploaded, the client paid, and I canceled the scheduled email with exactly 30 minutes to spare. I went out to the courtyard, found the key in the grass, unlocked my phone, and watched my account balance rise by $500. That was step 1. The system worked, not because I was disciplined, but because I had designed an environment that treated discipline as a matter of absolute survival. But $500 was just a temporary Band-Aid on a massive, bleeding $10,000 wound. I still had a mountain of credit card debt, a failing Shopify storefront, and a list of 20 different urgent tasks that gave me intense decision fatigue every time I looked at it. This was where I had to deploy my second weaponized combination. Eat the frog mixed with Parkinson's law, executed with maximum psychological pressure. Parkinson's law states that work expands to fill the time available for its completion. If you give yourself a week to do a task, it takes a week. If you give yourself an hour, it takes an hour. Most people use this rule passively, but I decided to use it aggressively.
I looked at my overwhelming list of 20 tasks and used the eat the frog principle to isolate the single biggest, ugliest, most terrifying task on there. The one thing I was avoiding the most. It was making a direct phone call to an incredibly angry, difficult client who owed my side business $1,200 but was refusing to pay because of a minor dispute. Just thinking about calling him made my stomach churn with anxiety, which is exactly why it was the frog I had to eat first. To force myself to do it without overthinking or hesitating, I walked over to my home internet router and pulled the plug, cutting off the Wi-Fi for my entire apartment. Then I turned on my phone's mobile hotspot and connected my laptop. I checked the battery on my phone. It was sitting at exactly 15%. Based on my phone's degraded battery life, 15% of hotspot usage meant I had approximately 45 minutes before the phone completely died, cutting off my internet, disconnecting my laptop, and ruining my entire workday. I had created an artificial high-stakes deadline. The clock was ticking, and it was ticking fast. If I spent 15 minutes pacing around the room worrying about what to say to the angry client, my battery would drain to 10% and I would run out of time to actually send him the updated contract terms. The pressure was intense. The ticking clock forced my brain out of its usual cycle of overanalysis and self-doubt. When you only have 30 minutes of battery left to save your business, you don't have time to feel anxious. You don't have time to draft a perfect script or worry about rejection. I picked up the phone, dialed his number immediately, and let it ring. When he answered, my voice did not shake. I didn't have the luxury of being timid. I laid out the facts, offered him a small compromise to resolve the dispute, and demanded the payment. Because I was forced to be direct and concise due to my own ticking clock, he was taken aback by my assertiveness. Within 25 minutes, he agreed to the terms, processed the transfer, and $1,200 hit my account just as my phone screen flashed a warning and died. 2 massive victories in 24 hours. I was realizing that the secret to extreme productivity is not to become a stronger person, it's to create a weaker environment for your bad habits.
But the final, most terrifying monster was still waiting for me. The remaining $8,300 of high-interest credit card debt distributed across multiple accounts. Looking at that total number was like looking at a mountain I was supposed to climb with broken legs. It triggered an immediate sense of hopelessness. This is where the standard presentation of the 80-20 principle and the salami slice method completely fails in mainstream productivity videos. YouTubers love to tell you to look at your life and find the 20% of actions that cause 80% of your happiness. That is a beautiful sentiment for a self-help vlog, but it does absolutely nothing when you are drowning in debt. I had to apply the cold, hard mathematics of the 80-20 rule to my financial crisis. I sat down with a piece of paper and analyzed my debt structure. I realized that 80% of my financial stress and psychological torment was not caused by the total $10,000. It was being driven by exactly 20% of the debt, specifically a single $2,000 balance on my Chase credit card that carried a predatory 29% interest rate. That one card was compounding so fast it was dragging my entire psychological state into the mud. The other $8,000 was in low-interest student loans and a 0% interest payment plan that I could afford to ignore for the next 6 months. By isolating that one card, the mountain suddenly shrank into a small hill. I did not have a $10,000 problem anymore. I had a $2,000 problem. Next, I took the salami slice method. You do not try to eat a whole salami in one bite. You slice it down into pieces so thin they become effortless to consume. I took that $2,000 target and divided it by 30 days. The math was simple, $67 a day. That was my new daily highlight, my sole ultimate metric for the next month. I completely stopped caring about my long-term career goals, stopped caring about building a massive brand, and stopped worrying about the rest of my life. My single, solitary focus every single day was to generate an extra $67 above my survival expenses and immediately send it to that Chase account.
If I hit that $67 mark, the day was an absolute win, even if I spent the rest of the day sleeping or staring at a wall. To hit this number without relying on luck, I set up an automated system. I calculated that driving an extra 3 QXA for Uber after midnight would bring in roughly $40, and selling one old item for my apartment on eBay or doing one quick freelance copywriting task on Fiverr would cover the remaining $27. I turned this into a daily, non-negotiable ritual. Every single morning, I woke up with one thought in my head: where is my $67? By breaking the crisis down into a daily, bite-sized battle, my brain stopped freezing. It became a game I knew exactly how to win. Day after day, I sliced away at that debt. 29 days later, I sat at my desk, logged into my Chase account, and watched the balance drop to exactly zero. The weight that lifted off my chest in that moment was so immense I could literally feel the oxygen rushing back into my lungs. If you are sitting there right now, staring at your screen, feeling completely overwhelmed by your life, your debt, or your lack of progress, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I am not here to tell you to buy a journal, wake up at 5 a.m., or read another 50 productivity books. I am your older brother telling you to stop consuming the polite, sanitized lies of people who have never had to struggle for a single day in their lives. The reason you are stuck is not because you are lazy. It's because you are trying to solve real-world, high-stakes problems with tools designed for a playground. When you are in a financial or mental crisis, you do not need more information. You are already drowning in information. What you need is an ironclad system that removes your ability to choose. Stop relying on your willpower, because your willpower is a liar that will always choose comfort when things get hard. Instead, build a trap. Create a Ulysses Pact that makes failure completely unacceptable. Use Parkinson's law to turn your tasks into a high-octane race against time. Slice your massive anxieties down to small daily financial targets that you can crush before lunchtime. You do not need to fix your entire life today. You just need to win the tiny battle happening right in front of you over the next 24 hours. If you want to see exactly how I took these exact same weaponized systems and used them to completely dismantle the predatory credit traps set by major American banks so I could build real, lasting wealth, click on the video appearing on your screen right now. Let's stop reading about success and start engineering it. I'll see you over there.